Hi, Minister Freeland. Brian Platt with Bloomberg. From what I can tell, since Parliament came back, the government has been trying to pass its capital gains Ways and Means motion, and it needs to pass this before it, or it wants to pass this before it introduces legislation. It's been delayed because of the privilege motions in the House, or the privilege debates. Are you getting worried that you may not have time to pass this capital gains legislation? There's obviously a ticking clock on this Parliament. Are you worried you're going to run out of time? And if so, what do you intend to do about that?
No, I'm not. I have confidence that at the end of the day, all of us who have the huge privilege of serving Canadians in Parliament need to and will recognize that our job when we come to Parliament is to work for Canada and Canadians. And that means not wasting precious parliamentary time with dilatory motions. It means having real debates about real issues and then getting down to a vote. And on the legislation you mentioned, we had a vote in June. There was a clear majority of MPs elected by Canadians in support of that measure, and I'm confident that we will be able to proceed. I really think, I think Canadians do not like their Parliament being made into a spectacle. I think Canadians do not like Parliament behaving in a way that, as a mother, I would consider totally unacceptable if my kids told me that was happening in the playground or the gym at school. It is just, it's not okay. We have serious disagreements in Parliament, and everyone here is prepared to debate the issues seriously and reasonably. And I am prepared, I think reasonable people can disagree with the specific policies we put forward, and I am happy, and all of us are happy to debate them on the merits of each of our policies. But what we're seeing the Conservatives try to do to our House of Commons, turn it into a place where the currency is not real debate. The currency is, nursery school insults, and the currency is dilatory motions. I think that really cheapens our country and cheapens our democracy. And I really have faith that Canadians are not amused, are not impressed by this, and that the majority of working with the majority of parliamentarians, we will succeed in moving past this.
I also want to ask you about the economy. You talked this morning about inflation being low and interest rates falling, but the flip side of that is that the labor market is worsening, and it does stand in contrast to the U.S., where they had a big surprise increase in jobs last week. Are you worried about Canada's labor market? Are you worried about where this is heading right now? Because that is the reason why interest rates are falling at the moment, is because the labor market is weakening.
Well, actually, interest rates have come down because the Bank of Canada has taken a decision to move interest rates down. And I will refer you to the Bank of Canada's rationale for lowering rates. But the bank does tend to be very focused on where inflation is in its decisions on interest rates. Look, I think that we have had a lot of very important and very positive macroeconomic news in recent months. Most important has been what has happened with inflation. Inflation has been really painful for Canadians. Every single one of us sitting here has heard about the pain that inflation has caused our constituents. And so the fact that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for the past 8 months is a really big deal, 2% in August. It is also the case that interest rates rose at a historically fast level and to a high level given recent experience, and that interest rates moved up to a really contractionary place. Notwithstanding the 3 interest rate cuts, interest rates are still, as the bank has said, and as the universal consensus of Canadian economists is, that interest rates remain at a contractionary level. Interest rates are not at neutral. And anyone who speaks to a Canadian family or to a Canadian business will hear from that family and from that business that having interest rates that are still contractionary is having a real impact on Canada and Canadians. I think it's also a truth universally acknowledged, and Brian, you will hear this from every single Canadian economist you talk to, that the structure of the Canadian mortgage market is different from the structure of the U.S. mortgage market. The fact that we tend to have 5-year mortgages rather than 30-year mortgages means that interest rate increases are passed through to regular Canadians much more quickly, and that weighs on the spending capacity of Canadian households, and it also then weighs on the consumption of Canadian households. So Canadian small businesses feel it, and they feel it and have been particularly feeling it when it comes to the capacity of Canadians to consume services. So that's kind of where I see the inflation and interest rate dynamic. Certainly, jobs and incomes are something we watch really, really closely. One of our focuses during COVID was to try to help Canadian businesses preserve as many jobs as possible. We didn't want people out on the streets. We didn't want them to lose their connection to their job. And one of our focuses post the COVID recession has been to help get more jobs back faster, and I'm really glad that we have 1.3 million more jobs in Canada than we had before COVID, and I'm especially glad that for 19 months wages have been outpacing inflation. But getting back to the start of your question, if your question is, do I still have concerns about the macro environment? For sure. I think it is very important to respect the independence of the Bank of Canada, and I certainly do. But I think your question points to some pressures that the economy is still facing at a time when interest rates are still, meaningfully above their neutral level.
Hi, Rachel Haynes from CTV News. Minister Freeland, the Bloc demand remains the same about the OAS, but your government didn't support their motion last week, and I'm going to put something to you that Minister Duclos said yesterday, which is what the Bloc is proposing is not the right way to proceed because it gives more money to affluent seniors than to low-income seniors. Has your government shut the door completely on this demand?
So, as I said, I always agree with Jean-Yves. We actually work very closely together. A collaboration, a partnership that was really forged during COVID in the COVID committee. What I would say about the Bloc is we believe truly in having an open door to cooperation with all parties in Parliament. And we have been having some very productive, very sincere conversations with the Bloc. In fact, Jean-Yves and our House Leader and Steve McKinnon and I had a long conversation last week talking about their proposals, getting an understanding of what were the core issues that were important to them, and putting forward from our own perspective what we think are the core issues that are important for Canadians, for Quebecers. It was a fruitful conversation, and we are very open and keen to continuing that discussion with the Bloc. At the same time, we continue to have very fruitful and productive and constructive conversations with the NDP. I'm in close touch with my counterpart, many of my colleagues are in close touch with their counterparts as well. And, you know, we're proud of our government's record in passing some historic legislation for Canada and Canadians, working collaboratively with the NDP, dental care, free contraceptives, free diabetes medication, also the Green Industrial Transformation Investment Tax Credits. These are really, really important measures that are, you know, transforming Canada in a positive way. We did that working collaboratively with the NDP, and we're definitely having conversations with them as well about ways that we can continue to work together.
Thank you. Are you bringing up the fact that you're talking with the NDP because you're going to start courting their support again, because you are saying no to the bloc and you're not going to be meeting this OAS demand?
Not at all. We really take as our starting point what is good for Canada and Canadians. Our starting point is talking to actual Canadians, talking to individual Canadians in our constituencies, talking to people who represent them. I've been having good conversations with union leaders and business leaders. I know my colleagues have as well. And with that as a starting point, we are then really open to looking for partners in this Parliament so that we can get the work of Canada, the work for Canadians done.
Kate.
Good morning, Ministers. Kate McKenna from CBC News. Just to follow up on my colleague's question, will your government be presenting a counteroffer to the bloc this week, one that boosts benefits for seniors but at a lower cost?
As I said, we have a real open door. We have been having constructive and very concrete conversations with both the Bloc and the NDP. I'd be ready to have conversations with the Conservatives if they'd like. Seriously, there are some things that we agree with them on too, and we did work together during COVID with the Conservatives. So, you know, our view is every single person in Parliament is there because Canadians elected them. And every single person in Parliament is there because Canadians elected them to work for them every day in a challenging time for Canada and the world. We have our own very clear view about what our values are and what we need to do for Canadians. And we are open to working constructively and creatively with other members of Parliament to get that done. We recognize that we're in a minority in Parliament, and that means we need to be flexible and creative. But we also recognize that minority parliaments can get a lot done. We have gotten a lot done in a minority position. And historically, minority governments have gotten a lot done. I think, you know, I think everyone is proud of the work that Lester B. Pearson and his government got done in a minority.
And how much longer is the government prepared to see the House tied up with privilege motions, and what options are you considering going forward?
Look, I just think it is appalling and ridiculous what we're seeing in the House of Commons. And I think it is really disrespectful to Canadians and disrespectful to our democracy. We need to step back for a minute and recognize what a big deal it is to have a democracy. How lucky we are as a country to govern ourselves this way. And I'm grateful to the generations of Canadians who've built this incredibly complicated, incredibly wonderful machine of democratic government. I don't take that for granted for a single moment. And so it makes me frustrated and it makes me angry to see just the disrespect for constituents, the disrespect for Parliament that the Conservatives are demonstrating.
I'm just going to jump in if I may, because we're surely running out of time and we have 2 more questions in the room and a couple online. So if we could just move ahead and try and keep our questions tight and our answers tight too, Mac.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Will there be a fall economic statement? Should Canadians expect that there'll be new spending measures in there? So it could be a conference motion. And if you're feeling generous on making some news, just tell us what day it's going to be, too. That'd be great as well.
I'm feeling generous, but my generosity does not extend that far. So we are working hard on a fall economic statement. That is one of the things that we're talking about with the NDP and the Bloc. It is certainly something that we're talking about with Canadians. That is work that we started to do really the day after tabling the budget. We've been having a lot of discussions, a lot of conversations across the country with union leaders, with business leaders, with Canadians in all walks of life. And I do just want to emphasize that even as those conversations happen, even as we are frustrated and appalled by the spectacle the Conservatives are making of Parliament, the work of our government continues. And I want to give you guys two examples. So, since the House came back into session, Finance has announced, I've announced two hugely significant measures which are going to happen no matter what. And that is the 30-year amortizations for insured mortgages for first-time home buyers and for everyone buying a new build, and raising the limit to 1.5. That is transformative in the life of millions and millions of Canadians, and I know that because I have heard from them. We also have we announced last week, the Canada Carbon Rebate. That is $2.5 billion going back to Canadian small and medium-sized businesses. In Ontario, it means a business that employs 10 people is going to get $4,000. A business that employs 499 people is going to get $200,000. This is real money for our businesses at a time when they need it. Those are two really, really meaty measures. If I were today presenting a fall economic statement that contained those two measures as our headline measures, I can assure all of you you'd have a lot to write about and a lot to put on your programs. So we're doing a lot, and we're being thoughtful and creative about the things, about looking at areas where we can move ahead and not be blocked by, playground tactics.
Follow-up, Mac?
You're mentioning playground tactics. I keep hearing these rumors, so I want to put it to you. Is your government considering proroguing Parliament?
No.
Dylan Robertson, go ahead.
Minister Freeland, your government has more to roll out in the FES you just mentioned. What are the factors that you're weighing in constructing the FES to maintain the confidence of the House?
I'll be very basic. Our focus in the FES is going to be the very clear economic plan we laid out in the budget. Our focus is fairness for every generation, and we deliver that by getting more homes built faster, by acting on affordability for Canadians, and by acting to drive economic growth, and doing all of that from a strong fiscal foundation. And listening to the questions all of you have been asking today, you guys also are responding to what you're hearing from Canadians, and I would put all of your questions in that space. You've been asking about housing, you've been asking about growth, you've been asking about affordability. That's, our clear plan and direction. We put in place some important measures in the budget, and we are following through.
What are your thoughts on this block motion when you're talking about the budget plan that called for fiscal responsibility, that called for fairness for every generation, not just the wealthiest demographic in Canada?
Look, I think those are really important considerations, and in our meeting with our colleagues from the Bloc, we explained that those are concerns our government has. I think when you go into any kind of negotiation, you have to know clearly what your values and your objectives are. But you also have to be open to really listening to the values and objectives of your counterpart. And where there is a true desire to reach a win-win outcome, a creative, flexible, and listening approach can go a long way.